We go into the first one. Yeah, actually most of us answered junctional tachycardia, and I can understand why, because if you can see, if you look at the ECG, unfortunately the answer is not junctional tachycardia. The answer is actually first degree heart block. So why? So only 3% answered correctly. We look at the ECG bank. So as you can see, this is actually, I would say, I can't find the P, okay? But I can see the QRS, and the QRS is narrow. So that actually removes second degree heart block, because there's no drop and complete heart block, because the A and the V are not dissociated. So that leaves us with first degree heart block, junctional tachycardia, or sinus arrhythmia. Sinus arrhythmia, you should at least see some P waves that are varying in degree, but we don't see it here. But it's not to say that we don't have sinus arrhythmia, just that the diagnosis is not sinus arrhythmia, because you can't actually discern the PI interval. So, but what you can see is, you can see before the QRS complex, for some bits, they are actually kind of like a slurring, right? And then some of them doesn't have. So you can think that it is delta, but you must remember that delta is consistent because the rate is consistent. So the rate of pre-excitation is always consistent. But why would this be inconsistent? So the only answer is there is some degree of sinus arrhythmia, but it's not enough to actually put this as a diagnosis of sinus arrhythmia. This patient actually has a first degree heart block, and the P is so long that it's hiding in the QRS. So if you see the P, this P, it cannot conduct to this QRS, no way. So I'll just, I have a diagram here actually to show. This is a long lead through that we have, and you can see these blips, the one that we think is delta. And as I said, varying degrees of delta, this is uncommon when the rate of the QRS is almost regular. So what we can think of is, this actually is the P wave for the next QRS complex. And this actually happens throughout the whole strip. And so that's why the answer is first degree heart block. Okay. Anyone have anything to add? Okay. Oh, hold on.
So Dr. Ming pointed a very good point. But when I look at ECG, actually there can be a few other differential where are we dealing with junctional rhythms with upsursion of the sinus arrhythmia. So, but looking at that, it's because one of the beat actually you can see the delta is not that prominent compared to the rest of the QRS complex, because we can see a nice P wave embedded in the QRS, most of it isorhythmic. But at one point too, I can think there's a not really prominent. So that's why I just wonder whether is it other things that can be offered as differential, like whether is it isorhythmic envidizations, but with the sinus arrhythmia, which means the sinus just kick very fast. That may be one of the differentials as well. Yeah. What do you think?
So I think isorhythmic dissociation, it can be, of course it can be, but then for me isorhythmic dissociation is a diagnosis that you make when you cannot differentiate, you cannot have any maneuver to differentiate. So isorhythmic dissociation, for me, your job is a finding on the ECG, but it's our job to actually differentiate what is it. I don't think I gave isorhythmic dissociation as an answer, because that would be very ambiguous.
Yeah, very ambiguous, yeah.
I agree with Dr. Ridwan. It's actually a very good differential diagnosis. And when we find isorhythmic dissociation, you cannot just leave it at isorhythmic dissociation and then feel proud like, oh, that's a very good diagnosis that I came up with.
Yeah.
No. So you have to either increase the rate or reduce the rate and unmask what is underlying the isorhythmic dissociation.
Yeah, very good explanation, because it's very hard to pinpoint out. This one is isorhythmic. We're quite happy with that, but there's a few other maneuvers that we can do. Maybe slow down the vagal tones. Maybe we can see the P wave better, and then from that we can differentiate whether is it definitely a component of isorhythmic by just doing the vagal tone maneuver as well.
Or you can do a stress test.
Yes.
Okay. So now we go to second ECG. Before we go, let's see how the audience answered. So most of us answered AVRT. Okay. So I also can understand why people think it's, oh, yeah, but the answer is junctional tachycardia. So why? So we go back to the ECG. So you can see, let's go to the case. So you can see this narrow complex, right? So definitely no questions asked. Anyone would agree with us that it's narrow complex. It's not even 3 boxes, the borderline wide complex. It's really narrow. So we know that this is a narrow complex tachycardia, and we know that there is more V than A. We can see, because I'll just show it to you. You can see that there are blips on the ECG, but you cannot time it very well because the P waves or the blips are actually inside, embedded maybe in the T wave, the QRS complex, etc., etc. But you know these are the P's that you can see. So you can actually see that this is actually the shortest PP interval that you can find lah. Okay, there may be something shorter here, but we don't know. So but this is the shortest that you can find. So with this shortest, you can actually try and map and see what is on the subsequent and the previous PP interval. So if you map it, you can actually see that there is actually a P, and the P is actually hiding in the T wave, the QRS complex, and you can actually match everything out. The P is very consistent. And so is the RR interval. So you know that there's 25 RR in QRS complexes and 18 atrial or P waves. So there's a discrepancy here. So there's a dissociation, AV dissociation. So when we have AV dissociation, you go through this algorithm. You have if you have more A than V, then you consider as complete heart block. Very easy. If you have A equals to V, that is when the problem comes, isorhythmic dissociation. So we must actually differentiate whether it's complete heart block or ventricular rhythm. So if you have more V than A, we assume there is always ventricular rhythm, but that's not always the case. It just means that the rhythm is just below the node. So it's infranodal. It can be anything infranodal. It can be your fascicular VT also. It can be your ventricular rhythm. It can be your junctional tachycardia that cause this. The reason why it's not fascicular VT is because the QRS complex is too narrow to be a fascicular VT. Because anyway, fascicular VT, when it depolarizes, it must catch into the fascicle. So you must have at least either a posterior fascicular block or an anterior fascicular block picture. So you get a wideish but not very wide QRS complex. So the answer is, for me, it's junctional tachy. What do you guys think?
So again, this is almost similar to the previous explanation. It's more toward AV dissociations. It's just trying to find where's the E, where's the V, and then as you pointed very nicely, where's the caliper. Then we can see there's V more than E. Yeah, I definitely think it's more than junctional rhythms with AV dissociation as well.
Now we go into ECG 3. Oh, that's very good. I think 88% to get it right. Huh? The diagnosis of atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction. Huh? That's very good. So look at the ECG now. This at glance actually, if you look at the ECG at glance, one of the differential, and maybe most of the doctors diagnose this as sinus tachycardia, right? Because of looks like narrow complex tachycardia. You can see the P wave here. Huh? This is P wave, right? P wave followed by QRS. Huh? 1 P, 1 QRS. So sinus tachycardia. All right? And it is regular. Definitely, if it's regular, very clear cut P wave here, definitely it's not atrial fibrillation. SVT is one of the differential actually, because it's narrow. Okay, it's narrow complex QRS. But what are the important clues, which is always you need to remember? How actually we can a clue to the diagnosis of atrial flutter 2-to-1. It's quite common actually. It can be mistakenly diagnosed as sinus tachy. If you see a tachycardia, which is consistently around 150 beat per minute, narrow complex, you need to consider 2-to-1 atrial flutter as one of the differential diagnosis. And another clue is you must see all the leads. Okay, sometimes you cannot see because this is not classical. This is not classical flutter wave, where you can see the sawtooth appearance. But in this lead 2, you can see the sawtooth. But in fact, in real life, 2-to-1 atrial conduction, atrial flutter 2-to-1, you cannot see the sawtooth appearance. So you must see all the leads, and you try to find out where is the P wave. Where is the P wave? All right, where is the P wave? And you need to consider, you can use, another clue is, you can watch the rhythm for a longer time. Put a long lead 2, and sometimes it can change to 3-to-1 to 4-to-1. So you can confirm the diagnosis. Or another way, you can control you can cut, you can block again, you further block the AV node. You can give what? You can give adenosine, for example. You can see the P wave clearer. All right? Another way is quite not commonly performed is we are doing Lewis lead to further enhance the P wave. It is not really common done, but you can consider to do it to see the P wave clearer. All right? When you see tachycardia, any tachycardia, sinus, you see narrow complex tachycardia, you are not sure what is your diagnosis. First step, try to find out where is the P wave. Okay, if you see, there are big rule. If you see a P wave, if you see a P wave in between R to R interval, okay, for example, in this lead 2, 3, AVF, we can see here, the P wave is negative here. All right, this is the P wave, negative here. In fact, it is in the middle of R to R. You should suspect, based on this rule, you should suspect another P wave in the QRS here, embedded in the QRS. So this is, you can see quite clearly, 2 P wave followed by 1 QRS. All right? And this is how you do Lewis lead. Okay? Right arm at the manubrium, left arm electrode at the 5th intercostal space, left leg at the right lower costal margin. So, important thing here, do not miss flutter. Many of us diagnose this ECG as a tachycardia, sinus tachycardia, and keep on giving medication, beta blocker. But sinus tachycardia, remember, it will not fix at 150. Sinus tachycardia, you have this fluctuation, 120, 160, and 70. If it's fixed around 140, 150, always think of atrial flutter. Any added information from?
Actually, I have no comments on the ECG. I think it's well explained. But regarding the ECG machines, right, we have like old machines, one lead you print out, then followed by another, compared to the new, so-called relatively new ECG machine that you can get a 12 lead ECG at one go. You try to do the Lewis lead using the so-called relatively new ECG machine. You really can't print out, no? Because you must have all the 12 vectors to be together, only can print out. But let's say you try the old machine, one lead followed by another, then you can do the Lewis lead.
I think the Lewis lead, you just have to change the 3 leads. The earth is still there, and then you just put the 6 V1 to V6. But you look at the 1, 2, and 3 only. You can still do it.
The day I tried, not sure why, you put an error, so I can't print out.
Okay. I think why Faiz brought this ECG out is, I think it's very important. Flutter, we give medications to rate control, but actually flutter is potentially curable, because if you send a patient for ablation, it's not I think Chi will be able, or Faiz will be able to tell you, it's not actually a very difficult ablation, and it's potentially curative. You actually, the patient doesn't need to be on any medications after that for the flutter. So I think it's very important to identify this, don't misdiagnose this, and then send to maybe an EP center for ablation. Otherwise, I think good ECG.
But I think this case is very similar to your case, And I mean, of course, the big screw is there, but let's say you look at the PR. I mean, let's say it's sinus tachycardia. The PR is supraphysiological. I mean, of course, this is a flutter wave. So, I mean, let's say they think it's sinus key, it will look as if like this is
Yeah, so
short.
because this is very fast, so that's why the PR looks very short.
Yeah, so it should give them a hint that this is not sinus.
Huh?
But this is a flutter. I'm
Yeah,
trying
yeah,
to say
yeah.
that. I mean, let's say
Correct,
they
correct.
think that this is sinus tachycardia. The PR is just too short to be sinus lah, to conduct down
Correct.
to give the PR interval.
But anyway, if you're on call and you're not sure, patient is very stable, you can always follow Fai's way. Adenosine and see lah.
All right. Next ECG. Okay. Okay. Can I see the whole? 51%. Yeah, half of you answer it as sinus pause. Huh? Okay. Now we go back to the correct answer will be second degree SA exit block. Type 2. All right. Okay. Okay. Now we focus on the only at the link on the lead 2. So now you see here, this is very important. If you see something long pause, the first step is you need to check what is missing there, whether there is a P wave without KRS, or whether this is whether you have you don't have any P wave and definitely no KRS, all right? Or you have KRS, for example, in junction, all right, as an escape bit. But now in this tracing, you can see here very clearly there is a long here R2R interval without a P wave. Okay, drop in P wave. And 1P followed by 1 KRS. 1P followed by 1 KRS. So most likely this is come from the sinus node. Okay, sinus node. Look at the pause. R2R interval here, R2R interval here, R2R interval here. If you measure accurately, it is around 1.6 seconds. And look at the P to P interval prior to the loss bit, or you need to measure all the P to P interval. Try to get what are the shortest P to P interval. This P to P interval, P to P here, almost the same, right? So it is around 0.8 second. Okay, it is half of the 1.6 second. So the P to P interval is same. It is same. P to P interval is same, and its pause double to P to P interval. So this is, we got it as sinoatrial exit block, type 2. All right, secondary type 2. If you have type 1, you will have, I think this morning Dr. Rizwan has explained to you the type 1. You can have type 1 also sinoatrial exit block, second degree. You have P to P become shorter, but this one P to P is maintained same. Okay, so you can have sinoatrial type 2 by multiply the P to P interval. You can have this one, for example, this is double. You can have triple. Okay, exactly the number. Triple will be 2.4 second. So it's exactly multiple preceding P to P interval. So SA exit block, very important to know that as in a sinus node, you have not just a pacemaker which produce the impulse. You also have transitional cell, which is a conduction, like a AV node in the AV node down. So this is a transitional cell, transmit the impulse out to the atrium. To produce, B cell produce, T cell transmit out. So failure of transmission, but the production is normal. It is a subtype of, actually, it is sinoatrial subtype of sinus node disease. It can be mistakenly as sinus arrhythmia, but in sinus arrhythmia, the rate usually gradually slowing and then gradually speed up. And there is no R2R pattern, no multiple or no triple of the P to P interval. Another differential is sinus pause, as 50% answer this question. However, sinus pause usually more than 2 seconds, and it is not exactly multiply of the P to P interval. So the answer of this patient is type 2 sinus atrial exit block. All right? Okay. Any added information?
Just to highlight SA block, because I believe, for me personally, I think that SA block is the most difficult to differentiate, because even the first degree, you have to look at the EGM, to look at the impulse and generation of P wave to determine whether this is actually prolongation of PR impulse for the P intervals. So to suggest first degree. Even the second degree SA block type 1 is more toward group beating. You can see the PP interval prolongations and the PR interval still remain constant. However, when we look at the second degree SA block type 2 and compared to third degree SA block, it's very hard to differentiate unless we have to scrutinize the PP interval, which means we have to bring the calipers, label the PP interval before, and then try to look at whether is it constant or not. If there is a constant, definitely it's second degree. But if it's not constant, it's not atrial depositions, no ventricular depositions, it's definitely a third degree. That's usually my take when to differentiate whether is it a second degree or third degree, because the management for second degree and third degree, if type 2 will be slightly different compared to the waking buff, where it's group beating with more of physiological. That's my take. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Half of you answer as a unifocal atrial tachycardia. Very good. Okay. So in this ECG, you can see very clearly P wave here. Okay. The P wave, important thing, you look at the P wave, not just the rate, you look at the morphology. The morphology is consistent. You can see here at the lead V1 is positive deflection and it is consistent. So it means the consistent, it comes from the single focus. Alright? And this is 2 to 1 actually. The correct answer, the better answer will be 2 to 1. Atrial tachycardia with 2 to 1 conduction, alright? With 2 P wave followed by 1 QRS. Another differential, atrial flutter, is a good differential actually. It's a good differential because of it is as I showed you before, the flutter is one of them. But how to differentiate this? This is before that. This is the ECG. This is ECG prior giving the verapamil. You can see narrow complex tachycardia. This is the example. You can use verapamil. You are not sure. You can use adenosine also to slow down the conduction at the AV node level, and you can see the P wave clearly. All right, and it is not terminated. Okay, if it's not terminated, there are a few differential diagnoses. Okay, AVNRT quite easily terminated. AVRT easily terminated. Why? Because these two usually, because AV node is part of the circuit, but atrial tachycardia is not part of the circuit. It can slow down the AV node, but the tachycardia is still rotating, circling in the atrium. Atrial flutter versus atrial tachycardia. So what are the most important thing for me? You need to see the isoelectric line. You see here, there is obvious isoelectric line in between P wave here, as compared to the ECG number 3 just now. You cannot see any isoelectric line. So you can see here isoelectric line. So it points toward atrial tachycardia. And then number 2, look at the rate. Look at the ventricular rate. It is not 150. All right? It's not 150, the ventricular rate. All right. So this is more 100. It's around 120. All right? So atrial tachycardia and atrial flutter both are not dependent to the AV node. So if it not terminated usually by your beta blocker or your adenosine. And then look at the rate. Atrial rate faster in flutter. 250 beat, 350 beat of atrial rate. Okay, usually around 300. But in atrial tachycardia, the rate is slightly lower. Okay. Next step will be, definitely you have a tachycardia like this, persistent And this type of patient, you can have, in fact, this tachycardia can lead to cardiomyopathy. You need, the best treatment will be ablation, this type of patient. But before ablation, you try to map, we try to, based on this, you try to localize where is the site of atrial tachycardia. Is it left or right? That's the most important thing. All right, left and right. And then based on that few criteria, you can pinpoint certain where you want to map during the ablation. So this is very important for electrophysiologists to decide where to map, because we need to be more specific, more focused during the ablation. All right.
So we're going to proceed with my part of the hard questions.